In Edgar Wright's 2004 film Shaun of the Dead, Shaun and the rest of the human race battle zombies in suburban London. Wright uses different stylistic techniques to parody common tropes seen in horror films. Take the opening credits here, for example. The camera pans across different scenes of humans acting lethargic and zombie-like, and cuts to different parts of the city, and eventually, the camera tilts up to reveal Shaun, who at first can be mistaken for a zombie, but is then recognized as the title character who just got out of bed. A common characteristic of horror films is the fear of not seeing and the horror of seeing. Wright's editing establishes this idea in certain parts of the film. In this sequence, Shaun is trying to rescue Liz before she gets bitten by one of the zombies. Liz, David, and Diane get a call from Shaun, though they can't recognize his voice. Eventually, they then turn to the window where they hear Shaun crawling up. In order to build the fear of Liz, David, and Diane, the editor intercuts between the two actions. There are a lack of cuts when Ed and Shaun make contact with another zombie in their house. The lack of cuts builds suspense and fear, since the camera is focused on the men's faces instead of what's surrounding them. There are only two cuts, from a two-shot of Shaun and Ed to the television screen, which is telling them how to be safe from zombies. The suspense builds up until the camera quickly pans to the zombies standing next to Shaun and Ed, leading the two men to jump out of their seats screaming. Sound, primarily music, gives comic relief to moments in the film that are considered stressful and suspenseful. Take this moment here at the Winchester. The diegetic music of Queen plays while Ed, Liz, and Shaun try to kill this zombie while David tries to prevent the hundreds of zombies outside from entering the pub. This sequence is one of the few in the film where music is used to relieve fear and horror. Take the sequence where Ed and Shaun drunkenly leave the Winchester one night. They stumble out of the bar singing White Lines by Grandmaster Flash, and eventually come across a zombie walking towards them on the street. Too drunk to recognize it as a threat, Ed and Shaun sing the song and have the zombie fill in the missing parts, making the scene less fearful and more comical.
What's he do? Just say bass or freeze. What a tip.
The last instance of comic relief is in the final sequence where Ed, now a zombie after being hurt at the Winchester, and Shaun play video games while the Queen song You're My Best Friend plays non-diegetically. Here's a happy song playing during a happy ending, a typical trope of both horror and comedy genres. A large part of Shaun of the Dead is the film's costumes and props, specifically how they use the costumes and props in order to make a dark physical horror film become a lot more goofier. Shaun is dorky and his costume is a sign of his dorkiness. It's an electronic salesman uniform fit with a matching tie and nameplate. However, as the movie progresses, it gets stained with the blood of the zombies, as Wright highlights Shaun's journey from ordinary to extraordinary. An important characteristic of Shaun's uniform is when he gets red ink on his shirt.
You've got red on you. You got red on you. Hello, mate.
The red ink is a play on blood and makes his shirt become a little more grittier. Eventually, his clothes and face become stained with the blood of the zombies he has killed, which Wright uses to highlight Shaun's new awakening and strength.
Now, some of these are limited. What was that? I think it was Blue Monday.
Props are a major tool that are used to define expectations of the horror genre, the weapons especially. One of the first weapons used by Shaun and Ed to kill zombies are music records. As they throw the records trying to aim for the zombies' heads, Ed stumbles upon one of Liz's records and throws it immediately, since Liz and Shaun had ended their relationship and it means nothing to them any longer.
No.
Shaun and Ed then go to their shed where they find a cricket mallet and a shovel. Wright uses these two objects as weapons because although they are practical, they seem the most unlikely weapons a person would use in a stereotypical zombie apocalypse, thus making the horror genre a little more comedic and defying of audience expectations.
Why don't you just shoot him, man? Ed, for the last time. I fucking knew it. What did I tell you? Big Al was right.
The
Okay.
gun, a seemingly more appropriate weapon for the typical zombie horror film, is seen by Ed at the beginning of the film, who believes it works, as opposed to Shaun, who doesn't believe it. At the Winchester during the final battle scene, Shaun uses it as a blunt object. However, Shaun is proven wrong and begins to properly use the gun in a way that mostly everyone uses a rifle, by shooting it, trying to kill as many zombies as possible.
Although no one official is prepared to comment, religious groups are calling it Judgment Day. There's
Another prop that is essential to the narrative is television. Wright uses television sets as a comedic gag in order to give the audience background information about the world the film is set in, so they can better understand the circumstances the characters are currently under. The first instance is when Shaun is slipping through the channels, and each channel gives a piece to the bigger puzzle, warning that zombies are on the way.
Between those committing the atrocities, and perhaps more alarmingly,
The entire family. It's all coming right up on Zombies from Hell. 6 months on, and to many, the events of
Contrasting with the end, where now Liz is watching television 6 months later and flips through the channels where each channel is giving a snippet of life in London after Z-Day.
removing the head or destroying the brain. Incredible.
It's exciting now to have a top band with us talking about their work for the charity Zombie called.
The fact that the mobile deceased retained their primal instincts make them ideal recruitment for the service industry, as well as proving themselves useful in other roles, such as...
Edgar Wright plays with comedy and horror throughout the Shaun of the Dead, using different stylistic techniques, such as editing, mise-en-scène, and sound. However, it is not a direct parody of the genre, as Simon Pegg explains.
Be a Mickey take or in any way irreverent. The whole idea was that the horror aspect of it was totally true and faithful to the source material. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. We weren't making a comedy zombie film. We're making a film which is a zombie film and a comedy.